pretty much 9 o'clock. We'll probably have to get a few rolling in over the next few minutes, but let's pray, and we'll get into section 5, page 28. Father, thank you again for a beautiful morning after a night of rain and thunder, lightning, the whole works. Lord, here we bow down before you, knowing that you are a God who has all power over all creation, all power over us, all power over everything that goes on in this world. And so we just bow before you, knowing that you have everything in your hands, and that we want to just know more of you and know more of how we can communicate your goodness and your greatness to the rest of the world. So we pray that you just bless us as we work through this material and think through how we might be able to engage even more around the culture and the community around us and those that we bump into day by day, week by week. So we pray for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Right. Welcome. Okay, so we are at page 28 there. And so today, hoping to get through this full section here, just talking about the existence of God. So when you're having conversations with people that you bump into, whether that's in a schooling environment, whether that's in a work environment, maybe extended family or the likes, one thing that's going to come up pretty regularly is the ideas or the arguments around the existence of God. We, in a Western environment, are very much into a materialistic, not in terms of like buying stuff, but a materialistic understanding of the universe, understanding of the world. Like, I know that chair is there because I can see it, and I can go up and touch it, and I can look at it and study it, etc., etc. And so, believing in an invisible God whom we can't actually see, actually go up and physically touch, and study in that respect, is something that's difficult particularly in our culture. If you transpose yourself into some other cultures that have a pre-existing kind of assumption that the supernatural is real, then those conversations become different. But we're going to just talk through this a little bit based on our Western kind of cultural context. So the idea here is to give a few talking points. If we look down at we're just going to walk through those 6 arguments for the existence of God. Yeah, we're going to look at probability. We're going to look at creation and design. So that's a big one that's obviously going to be talked about in the likes of schooling pretty regularly. Anthropic, sorry. From the word anthropology, anthropic arguments. So, do we know what anthropology is? Study of man. Yeah. So oftentimes, if you go into a new culture, you will study the people in that culture, right? And you'll be doing anthropology. So we'll look at those arguments. Look at the argument from immaterialism, the existence of love and those sorts of things, and then we start to even give them some even bigger words there. So. We'll talk about them at the time. The transcendental argument and an ontological argument. We'll spend a little bit less time on those ones towards the end. But so let's hit it. Faith in the supernatural is plausible, and in fact we'll see. I think that it's more plausible than the alternative. So I think there is some sort of misconception around that. If we are to believe in things or believe in the supernatural, believe in things that we can't see and can't touch, then that's kind of like believing in fairy tales, believing in myths. We can't get facts, we can't get hard evidence for these things, and so we're not engaging in rational thinking. But as we sort of roll through these things here, I would suggest, and we're looking at the top of page 29 here now, that in order to live in the world, we actually are required to exercise faith, one way or the other. It suggests there that we use 3 tools of faith: reason, or we might call that science. So reason, intuition, and experiences. Those are all tied up in what we believe, and therefore what we have faith in. And I think one philosopher who was also a cartoonist, maybe that's why I enjoyed his work, he likes to use the term, there's a non-zero chance. The non-zero chance of there being a God, and there's a non-zero chance of there not being a God. Meaning that the chance of God not existing isn't zero. Now, he would call himself pretty close to an atheist, but he can't call himself an atheist because he realizes that the chance of God existing, it can't be zero. Now, he might put it at like 0.1% of the chance of God existing, and we would obviously hold that percentage chance way up around 100. But he argues that you can't say 100% that there is no God. He would also argue 100% that he would argue 100% that you can't argue 100% that there is a God. All right. So, but I like his terminology. There's a non-zero chance. Yeah. And I think that's fair in terms of if we're just looking at absolutely trying to be purely rational arguments for the existence of God or for the non-existence of God. We can't say one way or the other that it's 100%, just purely by the evidence that we see around us. Therefore, either which way you are exercising faith. Yeah? Either which way you're exercising faith. So the argument that as Christians we are placing our faith in something that we can't kind of 100% tangibly see and exist, and say that we as Christians are believing in fairy tales or the likes because we're using faith, that argument doesn't stack up, because we have to use faith one way or the other, because if you have to be honest that there is, even in, those that would claim to be an atheist, I don't think that's an intellectually honest position. I think an agnostic is an intellectually honest position. So an agnostic would say, I just don't know, I'm not 100% sure. I think maybe that there is no God, but I'm not 100% sure. I think that's intellectually honest. Atheism, I don't think, is intellectually honest.
In theory, there are no atheists, because to be an atheist, you have to say, I know everything.
Sure.
I know everything, therefore I know there is no God.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And nobody's going to claim that.
No, yet they will claim the label atheist. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I agree. I don't think it's an intellectually honest position to hold. Therefore, we believe in a God who we believe wants to be known, has made himself known, and we can see him in both in scriptures, and we can see him in the world around us. So let's just flow through that then. If we believe that there is a God, then and that is a starting point, then everything else after that flows logically. It flows logically that God would create us and not just then go and hide somewhere. That God has created us and actually wants to be known by us, and wants to interact with us, and has some plans for us. And so that makes logical sense that he has communicated with us in his revealed word that we call the Bible. It makes logical sense that we then reflect something of him. And so we're going to talk about the arguments around why is there good and evil and the likes. There's some logical outflowing of that. If we start with the position of there not being a God, then we have some stumbling blocks, because one, who created the world? Two, why are we organised in this way, and why do we have things that we call like right and wrong? And across the board, I mean, there's some differences, but across the board, cultures generally have some ideas of what's right and wrong. It's wrong to kill people. It's wrong to steal. It's right to look after and cherish and love. So why do we have those things? Or we don't have a logical progression from the idea of there being no God. We do have a logical progression. So what we're saying is that this is a plausible, logical belief. Faith in the supernatural is plausible, and we'd argue that it's more plausible than the alternative. Cool. Happy with that? Righto. Creation and design. It's in the middle of page 29 there. So we're created by an intelligent designer and that's more intellectually plausible than by random chance. Now, so heads up here, this is a massive topic, and there's a lot of good material around. There's a creation magazine that, I'm not sure whether we've got some examples in here. There's a few in here. So that's
Creation.com on the pages.
Yes. Yep, and so they have both a digital version of the magazine and a print version magazine. Just great material just to have, even just lying around your home for conversation starters. But some really, really fantastic material in here. So we're not going to have a look at the arguments for creation versus for intelligent design versus evolution here to any great detail. We'll scratch the surface, but yeah, creation.com, answersingenesis.org. Guys like Lou Meyer have a lot of great work in
Can I
this
just
area.
say about the creation magazine left lying around, it was one of the best decisions we made as parents. Our two children who were doctors devoured them
Yeah, again.
because they had to be intellectually satisfied with the creation argument.
Yep. Yeah,
Maybe
no,
that's
that's good.
Creation consciousness and creation consciousness would.
Mhm.
And that was the trigger for wanting to do that, was just having those magazines like that.
Yeah, cool. It's good. And what I'm blown away, because we subscribe to Creation magazine as well, what I'm blown away with is that just episode after episode, like, there's just more and more material that they're just pumping out, and there's just continually, providing evidence for creation and evidence against evolution. It's quite phenomenal. So I guess we just have to look at these two options in a somewhat logical way. Well, again, in a similar sort of way, if we start with the presupposition that there is a God, then the fact that there's a creation makes absolute logical sense. There's a clear logical path between there being a God and he's gone and created something. He has the power to create, he has the will to create, he has the love to create, and he's got the and he can create, obviously, in a brilliant, beautiful fashion that we see around the world. Naturalism has to assume, or naturalism or naturalistic evolution, whatever label you want to put there, has to assume that the origins began through just time and chance. So it's in your notes there on page 29. There's a very simple equation: an impersonal force, or whatever you want to call that. Energy, matter, atoms, space. So that impersonal force plus time plus chance equals what we see around us, the created order. Of course, naturalistic evolutionists wouldn't use the word created order or creation. But the idea is that given enough time, anything can happen. Let's just have a very quick look at that, just because it's helpful to have a snippet or two here and there, just to be able to engage with. Let's not worry about the big stuff that we see around us, trees, mountains, etc. Let's look at the most basic building block. So the idea there is that DNA, the most fundamental building block of our cells, 200 molecules must be in precise order. The probability of a strand of DNA forming through random mutations, just random chances, in an initial kind of primordial soup that evolution suggests we started out with, and then the cells all got together and they made like a fish kind of animal, I think, and then they crawled out of wood. Anyway, the whole 9 yards. So that the probability of that first strand mutating and coming into order is extremely low, and if you worked out the odds, the notes say there in Excel, Excel can't produce a number high enough to give you the exact odds there because of those random mutations. Now, what the notes don't mention there is that even the most basic cell that is made up of this DNA has to multiply, and to do that has to consume resources. So it has to have something else to consume, which also has to be able to be built by this in that particular odds. So let's for the sake of the argument say yes, perhaps that if you have billions and billions and billions of years of these mutations happening, and you could get one of those cells happening. One by itself doesn't last very long, it's going to die. It needs to have other cells to multiply with and to consume, and we all eat things, and so there's at the cellular level. So it needs, within a few minutes of it happening, it needs at least one more. And in fact, it needs lots and lots and lots more. So even if one did happen, it's of no help, it's going to die. It needs many, many more happening, and you see the odds there. So there's a lot of testimony from non-believing, non-Christian scientists that the mathematics of the original evolution theory just don't stack up. We've got to throw it away. And of course then the question is, so what's the answer? And they will always say, sorry, I don't know. Because there's really the only alternative that you've got to lean towards is a creator, and they don't want to go there. So, but at least they're intellectually honest enough to say that the maths around evolution and certainly the beginnings of evolution just don't add up. There's no way it can. So,
I actually don't. One of the weird things I struggle with is why they would want it to add up, because the medical world needs order. They need to be able to open a body and go, the heart is here, the kidney is here.
Yeah.
Why would they want to? Design is good for us.
Yeah.
Really, really good for us. We want normal, we want structure, we want order, and yet when you go into evolution, it all gets all muddly and murky and maybe this and maybe that.
Yeah.
Our son-in-law is studying medicine, and he gets really excited when his lecturers happen to mention how cool the body is and design. The word design comes up, and he's like, admit it.
Yeah, they kind of slip it in there, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Accidentally.
They do.
They can't help it.
They can't help it.
Yeah.
Because it's there, the design is there, right?
Even David Attenborough slips in the word design.
Yeah. You can't get away from it when you
Yes,
see that incredible creation and order.
And so that is a great question to bring up in these sorts of conversations. Why is it that we don't, the maths doesn't add up? Why is it that scientists would continue to just charge down this road of evolution when there's clear evidence and clear that the maths just doesn't add up, etc., etc. Why would they? I think the answer is because Romans 1, sin blinds us, right? Well, yeah, we don't. Yeah, but just they don't.
Could be accountable.
Yeah, and so there's probably a somewhat of an honesty in terms of knowing what the logical outflow of rejecting evolutionary, naturalistic evolution means, and they just don't want to go there. Sin blinds us to a degree, and sin just makes us want to. Make us even ready to continue to hold to things that we know can't be true.
Didn't Darwin change his mind on evolution too, and nobody wants to talk about that?
Yeah. There's from what I've what I've sort of looked into that on his deathbed. Yeah, there's.
I think that's the myth. I don't know that.
Yeah.
Any evidence for it.
Yeah, it's sort of an urban legend that's floated around. No one really knows whether it's true or not.
But he did say the proof will be in the fossil record, and it never has come through.
He said a number of Darwin said a number of things. It's a good couple of points. The proof will be in the fossil record, and he also pointed to, I'll see if I get the words right, irreducible complexity. So he said that there's also a problem that, and he didn't know. He realised that the science at his day just wasn't there. But if you could find something that was what he called irreducibly complex, so complex that it couldn't have existed in a half form or a 3/4 form. So a really good, and I think towards the end of his life, he pointed to the human eye being something that he was concerned about. So the human eye is very complex, right? And if you have it 90% working, it doesn't work. So evolution, if it was, even if it by random chance it mutated to get an eye that was 50% working or 90% working, it doesn't work. So evolution would drop it and get rid of it.
The other thing people don't like is it's actually, the origin of species is a racist document, because the subtitle is the preservation of favoured races by natural selection.
Sure.
So it's actually a racist document. and it's arguing the superiority of the white race.
Wasn't aware of that, so,
Yeah.
yeah. Which obviously wouldn't go down too well in our day and age. No.
So you could say, well, you must be a racist then.
Yeah,
Darwin
so,
was a racist.
yeah.
Trying
So,
to put that together.
so Darwin's own, I think his own, the things he pointed to, the fossil record and things like irreducible complexity, his own arguments probably stack up against his theory in years to come. So he was sure that the fossil record would produce, what is it called, the halfway man? What's that?
The missing link.
The missing link. Yeah, the missing link between the fossil record. It'll have to be in the fossil record somewhere between, from ape to man. That just the link between the two. Of course, it's never come up. It's the glaring hole in evolution.
And with them being racist, then our other people groups are going to throw them at the door straight away, so that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, well, good thing.
Quite such thing, isn't it? Yeah, we can't talk
Well,
about
you can look at the exact subtitle, but it is something like the preservation of favoured races through natural selection.
Which of course was going
Interesting.
And he wrote another book called, I think, The Ascent of Man,
Yeah.
that goes on to the white supremacist view.
Yeah, things that aren't publicised quite so much. Of Darwin.
No,
Yeah.
they're avoided.
Cool. But again, having looked at all those problems, and of course that's just scratching the surface. I again point to the other material that goes into those problems a whole lot more. Again, if there's a God, if there's an intelligent creator, designer, we make one assumption and the rest just flows. It's just completely logical. Excellent. Anything more around that one? That's a massive topic. Cool. Anthropic arguments. I've got my tongue around that particular word now. Anthropic. So, from anthropology, there is some fundamental aspects of us as humans that are best explained by a God who created this way. So here's a handful. One, ethics, morality, and conscience. So if we have a world that's created by a moral lawgiver, then that makes sense that we have a created order that has morals. When we come particularly to those that are made in the image of God, there is probably a slightly different order when we talk about the rest of the animal kingdom, but the world us as image bearers, because we are made in the image of a moral and ethical God, then it makes sense that we have a conscience. It makes sense that we have this sense of right and wrong. It makes sense that throughout the entirety of history, we see cultures that realise that some things are right, some things are wrong. So we've got to ask the question then, we should ask the question, where did that sense of morality come from? Why do we have it? And of course there's two basic answers. One, that conscience comes from God, or two, that it came from somewhere within creation, somewhere within us, through our culture, our evolution, our survival instincts, whatever we might want to say there. So if we're going to argue seriously that our conscience comes from a sense of, or our sense of conscience, comes from evolution, comes from the instinct that we have, then we do have a social problem that flows out of that. We have a social problem because then we're not ultimately held accountable for those rights, those things that are right or wrong, because they're only just constructed, are socially constructed. And of course we do have a large section of society at the moment that is pushing back on those ultimate claims of right and wrong, so that social change might happen. An example here, Peter Singer. Peter Singer, who's a professor at Princeton, and he's gotten in a little bit of hot water over the years, but he continues to put his work forward, and it continues now to be accepted probably just more and more. He argues that ethics should be balanced by measuring the happiness maximising best interest of society. Now, when you just state that line, you kind of think, oh, well, I could kind of see a little bit of sense and logic in that. Yeah. So that ethics should be balanced by the happiness maximising best interest of society. So, though, he concludes that it is not only okay, but preferable to commit infanticide in the case of severely handicapped babies. And he says that selective geriatricide would save the culture a whole lot of money. And so here he says those things should be held up as good because they both lead to the most relative greater happiness in society. Problem is, his mother got to a stage where she needed a lot of health care towards the end of her life, and needed a it was expensive, and he couldn't bring himself to go through with his theory. It was morally dishonest, emotionally dishonest. He couldn't bring himself to live that out, and he chose to care for his mother. He chose to pay a whole lot of money to care for his mother.
Changes his opinion, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know. He's an interesting character. Yeah, and his theories seem to push down. What do we? Not genocide. The idea of just kind of culling out parts of society. What's that called? Sorry.
Selection.
Yeah, selection.
Did you know that in New Zealand 3 times now they've tried to put that thing through Parliament quite quietly, that if you find out in pregnancy that your child has any sort of medical or physical disabilities and you choose to continue with that pregnancy, then the costs of that child's future would be on you.
Right. Yeah.
So, and even what's come through now with the thing that's come through about being able to end your life, it's just, we get slowly numb to it, that's the trouble.
Yeah, we do. And so
We struck down a law, Celeste, I don't know, it didn't come up through the media, but an amendment to the Abortion Act, which Simon O'Connor put up, that the abortionist and the other medical staff should be responsible for any attempted abortion in which a baby is born alive. And then only 35 MPs voted for that, the rest voted against it. So there's nothing in our law to say what should happen if an attempted aborted baby is born alive. That might be what they do in New York and put it in a soundproof room and leave it starved to death. That's what they do there. We haven't decided what will happen in that case.
Yeah, and so
So we will have it here at some point.
Yeah.
With the current law.
Yep, the trajectory is pretty sad there at the moment. We'll leave it there. It gets a little bit close to home sometimes. We start talking about some of the terrible things that have and are still going on around the world, because the argument for ethics and morals for the large majority of the world the arguments have started to come more and more from the idea of we socially construct ethics, we socially construct what is right and what is wrong, and so we can then start to make arguments that seem plausible on the face of it to much of the world, that we can do things such as the euthanasia and abortion and the likes. So it was the organisation People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I forget the name of the president, but was probably by now a previous president. But he said because of his understanding of naturalistic evolution that that a pig is a dog, is a boy, is a rat. That was his statement. Pig is a dog, is a boy, is a rat. You can't make moral distinctions between those. The human being was the third one in that list of four.
The dog and the pig and the rat are better off for the Greens, because I know they were opposed to cows having their babies, having their calves aborted.
Yeah.
So they're probably better off.
In some ways, yeah. And yeah. Anyhow, we'll continue on. Of course, we hold to an absolute moral lawgiver, which means that we can both consciously and logically lay out what is right and wrong, and that right and wrong can stand the test of the centuries, can stand the test of time, and it doesn't change over time. Now, might we have interpreted it rightly or wrongly over the periods of time? Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that God's absolute moral standard does not stand the test of time. Some have twisted it and tried to warp it for their own good over the years, but his stance remains true. All right, let's continue on. A religious experience and yearning for eternity, because otherwise we probably won't get through this. Ecclesiastes is probably the greatest example of this yearning for eternity, this yearning for some sort of meaningful existence beyond what we see around us. The book of Ecclesiastes is fantastic there. We see this in the world around us at the moment. There is a whole culture that is yearning for a purpose and a meaning for their existence, and they're trying to get that out of just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And I think a new generation is growing up in our midst that is realizing that the eat, drink, and be merry isn't cutting it, and which is testified with a massive, youth suicide rate just continuing to balloon and blossom. They are realizing that although they're being told that they are the center of the universe, they grow up into their teen years and realize actually no, they're not the center of the universe, and the world isn't what they thought it would be, and so they're reaching for all sorts, and they're trying to find their identity in social media and the likes, and that just, it doesn't cut it. Many studies have shown the more time a youth spends on social media, the greater the rate of depression. So it's and more likely then to point towards suicide. So but the point is that we have this unit, and everyone's trying to reach for it. Solomon was trying to do the same thing in the book of Ecclesiastes, and he concluded the world is meaningless, utterly meaningless, chasing after the wind. So this is a good thing that we can, in terms of a good thing that we can talk people through, and we can point to parts of our culture that actually bring this out. I think in the notes there, the atheist John Paul Sartre. How do we pronounce this? Sartre. John Paul Sartre said that there comes a time when one asks even Shakespeare and even in Beethoven, is that all there is? The Rolling Stones said a similar kind of thing. Tried and I tried and I tried, but I can't get no satisfaction. Probably could have done an English lesson with Shakespeare or something. But anyway, they got their point across. So we can ask people. So, like the Rolling Stones, why aren't we satisfied? Or ask them what, if they're not satisfied, what would satisfy them? And I think the answers would typically be a whole lot of materialistic type things, or maybe happiness in the family, etc., etc. But would that really satisfy them? What would be the next thing that would be, if they had all those things, what's next? If you had a great time, if you had a great job, if you had this, if you had that, what would be next? Because everything in this life seems to cry out that it's not enough. We want more. and that yearning for more, that yearning for a desire, we realise can only be fulfilled with God. Some people have said there's a God-shaped hole in our heart, or a God-shaped hole in our soul, and only God can fill that. So I think that even that yearning itself is a great talking point. Great talking point so that we can engage with that with people. And of course we can answer at the end there with Jesus' words from John 14, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Cool? We happy there? We'll keep moving. So we talked a little bit about our capacity for good and evil, and so we won't touch these last 4 sections. We will just roll over reasonably quickly. We talked about the capacity for good and evil. Why do we have that? We kind of understand, we get it, and I think the world gets the idea that a mother could sacrifice for her baby. There's something in us that kind of understands that idea. Something in us also that kind of just, how could Hitler have done what he did? How could Stalin have done what he did? Pol Pot, all these examples through history. How could those things have happened? And that capacity for amazing good, although we kind of understand it, what is it in us that the question has to be, what is it in us that makes us want to do good? And actually, what is it in us that makes these examples of incredible evil, that they keep on popping up through history? And even the smaller ones, the mass murderers, the guys that grab the guns in the States and just start to go for it. How can people get to that point? And I don't think there is anything out there in our culture that can explain that. But again, we've started with our argument being the presupposition that there is a God, and everything makes sense out of that. The reason that there is incredible good in the world is because we're made in the image of God, and He is good. He is perfectly good, and we mirror that in many ways. The reason that there is incredible evil in the world is because of Genesis 3, the fall. And so there is the ability for mankind to do incredible evil. We realize that there is both this in us. There is both this image of God, which propels us towards good, and our fallenness, which propels us towards bad. And of course, then there is the added kind of aspect that throughout history we've had people in history who have not just had the image of God in them, but they have had God Himself in them. And throughout history, there is a proportion of the human population that has propelled the human population towards some incredible good things. And perhaps an example might be Western democracy. Now, I realise that seems like it's crumbling around us at the moment. But in its genesis, Western democracy was a great good for the world, and has caused a lot of great good in the world. Yes, it's starting to fail on us as we turn away from God, for sure. So, anyway, there is some massive capacity for good and for evil in the world. Cannot be explained through any other means than by there being a creator God. Happy with that one? All right, a couple more, and we'll break the break. These last ones you can see from the notes. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time. Immaterialism, love. There is no way that we can scientifically prove the existence of love. Yeah, you can't do a scientific experiment. I can grab this pen, and I can give you a scientific experiment that will eventually, we can prove that gravity exists. We can do this a few times. We can measure it. We can measure the rate that it falls, etc., etc. And you can prove laws around gravity and weight and mass and all that kind of stuff. Prove love scientifically. How do you prove it? Why is there love? Why have we ever been breathless at a work of art or a beautiful waterfall or an incredible sunset? We have the opportunity just to have a little look around the South Island just recently as a family. Just the incredible, stunning beauty that's around the country that we live in is amazing. Why is it that draws us? I think an atheistic or a naturalistic worldview has no answer for that. Really doesn't. But we do. God is the starting point, and part of his essence is love, part of his essence is beauty, and he has reflected that in the world around us. And so that's another good talking point around the existence of God. The transcendental argument. Here we go. The last two are a little bit more. They start to ramp up in terms of being a little more academic. So we'll, again, not spend a whole lot of time. How do we know anything? How do we explain our experience and knowledge? We all feel like we know things, but how can we explain that idea of knowledge and knowing things? Again, because the animals don't experience that quite the same as we do, right? Why is it that we are set aside and we know things? The answer has to be that we are made in the image of God, who is knowledge himself, who knows all things, and so God is the precondition for knowledge, for logic, for science, for everything around that area. If God does not exist, the idea of knowledge, the idea of logic, they're actually logic. The idea of logic isn't logical. In fact, it's just a made-up concept. And what if we made it up wrong? What if we got our logic wrong? So so the transcendental argument starts to ask, how do we experience this idea of knowledge? Anyone heard of the ontological argument before? Here's how the ontological argument goes, and usually this argument falls into one of two things for responses. One, what on earth are you talking about? That makes no sense. Or two, that is the most profound argument for the existence of God, and that nails it for me. Everyone seems to be fall into one or two of those things. For me, I fall into the earlier one. It's just like, hold on, it's verbal trickery. But a lot of people, for this one, is an absolute clincher. So we'll put it in there. So one, here's the flow. One, God is that which nothing greater can be conceived. Two, the greatest thing that could possibly be conceived of possesses the attribute of existence, because if it didn't, there is a thing still greater that could be conceived. Therefore, God exists. Now, some people find that incredibly profound, and is the linchpin for them in believing in the existence of God. Doesn't do it for me, but if it does it for you, that's fantastic. We won't spend a whole lot of time on it. So there's the ontological argument, which has always made me giggle. All right, so there ends this book. If you have a look at the context page right back on page 1, we're about halfway through. So we're going to have a look at, we've really started to roll now with the apologetics side of things, having looked at worldviews quite a bit. We're going to have a look at problem of evil, scripture, the resurrection, have a look at some other world religions as well between now and the end of the year. All right, so let's break up into some groups. We can be praying for the service. We are starting in on a new series, which is around practical evangelism. We're calling it Loving Where You Live. So that's starting today. And